Now you wrote the book. Well, you wrote 3 books: The
Yeah.
Steal, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. I have even friends of mine. So I have some friends who are not conservative, and which is okay. But I have friends. One of my friends continues to say, "Oh, what proof do you have?" And
Mm,
no judges have ruled in
yeah.
Trump's favor. How do you answer
Right.
that? And I know it's probably
Not
one of the
true.
reasons you wrote these books, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that and so my background, and I try to mention this. I throw this out there because, well, maybe two things I tried to share, like in Oregon, and if I'm talking about this story, one is trust your senses. Don't
Yeah.
let these liars tell you that what you're seeing is not true. You can see with your own
We
eyes.
saw it in real time on election night.
Amen. We saw it. We saw it when they kicked people out of the room in Georgia, and they said on air, they said, "We're sending everybody home. There's a
Yeah.
water main break." Jim and I were like, "Oh, here we go. Here we go." And then, we stayed up, and then the next morning we find out that, Michigan and Pennsylvania, well, not yet Pennsylvania, but Michigan, Wisconsin had flipped, just
Yeah.
totally flipped. Hundreds of thousands of votes only for Biden. What's
It's
going
impossible.
on?
It can't.
Of course it was. And we can't, even then I remember having some hope, like, well, this is going to get fixed, but that's repulsive what they're doing. And then we heard Robin Voss at Michigan, the Republican speaker, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And we found out he's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so it
So
was
many
really
of them
devastating.
So many of them are part of the problem, aren't they?
Yeah. But in answer to that question, by the way, Roger Stone has said, if anybody says that to me, I get him copies of your books, Joe, because he's actually called them. He said, these are going to go down as classics because you've laid out what happened in 2020. And I'm proud of that. Rudy Giuliani as well has given me some great compliments. And actually President Trump on my first book gave me a great compliment. And I note that both in my second and third volumes for sure.
That's really
so.
Cool. You get those at joehoft.com. Is that right?
Well, you can, and they're eventually through Amazon. I put them up on
so you
Amazon.
Get it there or joehoft.com.
Actually,
or
and had
Amazon.
a group from Italy just translate them, and it's being sold in Italian now too. There's a site in Italy that's sharing it. So
it's nice that you put these things out there and have them. So, I know they're well researched.
Well, thanks. Well, that's I'm not going to lie. I'm not. And if I find out that I've said something that's bogus, then we're going to make some adjustments here. I'm not going to let that sit.
Right.
Similar with my experience in, overseeing financials, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be. And that's a hellacious stress for $1 billion block of business, but that's just the way it is. This is how things work. Now that mentality and that rigorousness is not in place in our elections. So really the first thing is it's not even the same. And that's probably where I've kind of over the last few years just kind of been, well, wait a minute. In corporate, we had to do this. Over here, we don't have to. So for example, and I've shared this, I've never been at an audit in any country where I've asked for something. They said, no, you can't have it. Never. Not in Chinese, not in Japanese, not in Spanish, not in any languages. Somebody said to me, no, you can't have it. At our corporation, you signed a code of conduct document. Everybody did that said, hey, if an auditor asks for something, you give it to them. And that's how you ensure that things are on the up and up. They're paying a lot of money, corporations, for auditors, both internal auditors and external auditors, to make sure things are on the up and up.
So in the political world, though, it's very common to not get the information when you try to get the audit.
And so that's kind of what hit me after the election. And even sometime after that, I revisited this tweet by Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy who wrote Dilbert, brilliant guy. Never know who he was until 2016 when he jumped behind Trump and we're like, this guy is brilliant. And he is, and he still is. And he said a month after the election, he put out this tweet where he says, don't fool yourself. When the election was over, when they forcefully prevented us from seeing basically what's going on.
Right.
And he was talking about Detroit. When observers there were kicked out, the whole room would cheer as they kicked these people out for just challenging what was going on. They were abused all day, and eventually most all of them were gone. We couldn't see what was going on. That's where they put the pizza boxes up on the windows. That's where the van showed up underneath the center in the middle of the night, and like 5 people had affidavits on that, and they neglected to even address that. And so that was bad. I think Philadelphia was the worst, though. And I'll give you a story here, and I could give these kind of stories to your friends all day long.
Yeah.
But in Pennsylvania, after the election, remember, you couldn't go into Philadelphia. Nobody was allowed in there other than the Democrats, right? And for 3 days, they just basically, I think, manufactured ballots. And eventually, after 3 days, they say, similar to Georgia, they say, oh, Joe Biden won. You're like, no, Joe, what do you mean? Trump on election day was up 2 million to 1 million in Pennsylvania. He crushed it. In some of these counties, he won like maybe up to 90% of the vote. I mean, he crushed it.
Really?
Except for there was 2
90%,
90%, 80%, huge numbers. 2 to 1. He's overall, even counting Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, he's at 2 million to 1. That's 2/3. That's 66 to 33 overall with these, to me, manufactured numbers out of those 2 big cities, which are notorious for 100% voter turnout, which is a lie. These districts that get 100%
can't get it.
Well, they you drive through them and the buildings are all burnt down. Jim and I just did that in St. Louis recently.
Really?
We were driving from the city center to the airport, cut through the city, and it's block after block after block of buildings that are boarded up or burnt down or both. And you're telling us that those same districts are getting 100% voter turnout?
It's impossible.
Garbage.
Yeah.
That's why when you say Oregon's blue, I say garbage.
Right.
I don't believe it until I see it. There's the evidence to me right now says that I cannot make a determination on whether Oregon is blue or not. And same with the 2020 election. That was my end result in the auditing world. If I am prevented from seeing the evidence like they were in Philadelphia.
Right.
And by the way, a really sharp guy reached out to me. This is what started happening. These smart people started reaching out. Joe, look at this. And I'm putting these posts up daily at the Gateway Pundit. We got up to 5 million hits a day after that election because we were dropping bombs. But one sharp guy, an actuary at a major U.S. corporation, goes, look at this. Trump's up 2 to 1 in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania on election day. 2 to 1. All of a sudden, they start counting these absentee ballots, and suddenly Trump loses to Biden on absentee. And remember, they made up the lie ahead of time. Well, Democrats will vote absentee. There was no evidence for that ever. There's nothing to support that statement.
Well, haven't absentee been traditionally more military people who are more conservative?
That's true. That's a great argument. There was no evidence for anybody to say that other than that they were preparing people for the eventual steal. And so what happens is this guy, this actuary, really smart guy, looks at the numbers and he says, look at this, Joe. In the mail-in ballots, there's a line. There's a line. There's a pattern that shouldn't be there. And for an auditor, that's like, and for anybody, it's like, that doesn't make sense. It's just common sense is all auditing is common sense. You do it a lot, you kind of know what to do and look for, but it's all common sense. So what this guy shows me is that in the counties where Trump won 80%, he'd only win 40% of the mail-in vote, meaning Biden won 60 to 40. If Trump won 60% of the ballot on the election day, well, then he only earned 20% of the mail-in ballot. And across the board, if you subtracted 40% of the turnout from election day and put that into the turnout for the mail-in ballots, you had your answer. And so the numbers had to be manipulated and pushed out to all these counties in a pattern that they knew would give Joe Biden the win.
Right. Right.
And that's what happened. We've got the evidence. And we started seeing this didn't come from a dummy. This came from one of the smartest guys that you can imagine, a number guru. This guy knows what he's talking about. And we got the evidence. It's right there because Pennsylvania had provided both numbers by county in both mail-in and election day results.
And,
So we
and
can
that's in
see
your
it.
book. Those are
It's in the
your
book.
books as
And
well.
yeah, we had a lot of these things like that. It's like, this proves to me as an auditor that there's a pattern here that doesn't make sense. And it goes opposite as well. If there's not a pattern that should be there, you'd also be questioning things. But in this case, there's a pattern. Now, what we also know, though, already is what Scott Adams had already said, which he said that Scott Adams says, sorry if you hear any background noise. Scott Adams says that the election was over when we were prevented from seeing this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. It was over. And he's right. And so that's the answer. If I'm being told as an auditor that I can't look at this stuff, I'm done.
Kind of all you need to know, right?
That's it. Okay, fine. Okay. And then I say, okay, fine. And move on and just say, I can't give an opinion.
That's right.
In this area, for all these absentee ballots, I can't give an opinion.
That's right.
So that's the answer to our friends too.
That's right. Yeah.
You can't prove either way who won that election, because this block of ballots, almost 2 million in Pennsylvania, they're not valid.
But so you have a lot of circumstantial evidence that you can see who won, right? In a way, if the evidence is everything has been kind of doctored in the direction of Joe Biden.
Well, then and that's a great point, Patrick. The evidence always was doctored to benefit Biden. I don't think that I've seen one single bit of evidence from 2020 where it looked like something was doctored, that it went towards Trump.
Right. That tells you all you need.
Not one.
All you need to know. What about the machines? How much of that was shown to be doctored?
True or false? Well, I tell you what, here's what so I think perhaps they use the machines to manufacture these results that they did, because maybe it's easier that way. At least you can come up with a number and then you just backfill with ballots.
Right,
which is what I think basically was done. Or they didn't even backfill with ballots. They just said, trust us, and nobody ever checked. Or if they tried to check, it's like Georgia right now, where there's 150,000 ballots that we can't get our hands on and haven't been able to now for 3.5 years, because the people that saw them in the recount said they're all carbon copies. So we can't even look at those yet. And that's going on. And for months, it went to the Supreme Court of Georgia. They pushed it down, and we still can't get them. So this is,
I have to ask, where is the law? Where is the Supreme Court? Where are the Republican Party? Where are these people?
Well, you're right. And talking to Liz Harrington today, she said something too. It's like, hey, Supreme Court just comes out and says, okay, all these January 6 guys that they've put, that they've thrown in prison, or some that are still in jail based on this one law, Supreme Court says, no, you can't. That's not the law. That you're using a regulation that isn't built for this. You've said this felony. These people committed felonies and obstructed justice based on this reg that has nothing to do with what you're even saying. So they threw it out. They said you cannot do that. So what's the Supreme Court doing? Or the Supreme Court's done. What are they doing? What's the DOJ?
Right.
They're not letting them go.
Well, we know the
People
DOJ
are sitting in prison.
We can't expect the DOJ because they're corrupt, but Democrats, but they're on the same side. But where is, quote unquote, our side? Where's the Republican Party? Where are the judges? I mean, Trump put a lot of judges in, right?
Well, DC, I don't know if people really know this. Barack Obama, one thing he did when he was president, he took over that DC court. He added 10 Obama judges to it, and it's just been filth ever since.